Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about the iPhone 4S. This is a special video. It's probably a trip down the memory lane for most of you who used to use these phones 12 years ago or so. It was my first iPhone. I remember the days of playing Minecraft Pocket Edition, Angry Birds, all sorts of games like this. And it is also amazing to see how far technology has come from using small phones like these to gigantic smartphones like these. In today's video we're going to be talking about what made the iPhone 4S great. And this was in fact Steve Jobs' last product. So let's begin. Okay, I think one of the standout points, just almost caught it there, it almost fell down. One of the standout points I think for the iPhone 4S is no doubt the design. It just looked different. Now, of course, before the 4S we had the 4, but this was an improved version of the 4. And the only way you can physically tell apart the 4 and 4S is the 4S has these lines here on the side, which the 4 didn't have. It had a line on the top. These are antenna bandwidth for the cellular service. And one of the issues with the iPhone 4 was antenna gate, where people had issues getting cellular connection. So Apple had to get back on the drawing board, place the antennas elsewhere, and that resolved the issue. Of course, the iPhone 4S was also Apple's first iPhone to introduce Siri. And in fact, the 4S stands for Siri. Now, you could get the iPhone 4S in two colors, this black and white. I personally prefer this black. It's just more classy, more iconic. But the white also looked nice. This was Apple's last glass back design iPhone before they went with an aluminum finish until the iPhone 8 and 10 came out. And I think because of that and the fact that it was Apple's first iPhone with flat edges, because remember of the 2 and the 3G we had a round edge. Then Apple went with the slate design, is what they call it. And yeah, it's just a nice thing to hold. I think it's maybe possibly Apple's best looking iPhone. Also, of course, we have our mute switch, our circular volume and buttons, and the power button on top, as well as the headphone jack. Now, this was Apple's also last iPhone to have the 30-pin connector. Let's now talk about the display. This has a 3.5-inch LCD display with a resolution of about 960 by 980 pixels, which is 336 pixels per inch. It's not a Retina display, so it's not the sharpest. This was a year before Apple introduced a Retina display. But still, by today's standards, it's bright, it's sharp enough, so it's quite usable. Now let's talk about the cameras. On the rear, in fact, it is a Sony camera. Apple used a Sony camera. It's an 8-megapixel camera that can record up to 1080p, Apple's first iPhone to record HD video with 30 frames per second. On the front, we have a 1.2 megapixel camera. The cameras in here are alright. I mean, of course, by modern standards, smartphone cameras have gone way beyond what it was back then, but they're alright, they do the job. Of course, one of probably most nostalgic features of the older iPhones is the headphone jack. The fact that I can plug in wired headphones without needing an adapter and listen to music. This iPhone can also work great as an iPod, an old school iPod. You can just download music here and stream your music. Now, the iPhone 4S initially came out with iOS 5. It was supported up to iOS 9.3.6, which is what this phone runs. And right now the phone has died, so I'm going to have to charge it up for us to walk through the OS. This phone has battery issues. It can charge up to 30% and then just straight jump to 1% and die. So if you're considering buying one of these iPhones, consider replacing the battery. Because other than the battery issues, this phone can still work great as just a simple smartphone for doing your everyday tasks like calling and texting and web browsing. Now, of course, it's not the best for web browsing. This phone packs an Apple's A5 chip, which by modern standards it's already lacking behind. You can especially notice it's not the fastest chip, obviously for a 12-year-old phone. When browsing through Safari, it is a bit on the slow side, but it still gets the job done. Of course, this was also Apple's first iPhone with Apple's well-known voice assistant, Siri, which if I charge the phone, will test how it works. Apart from that, as I said before, this is also Steve Jobs' last iPhone. In fact, he introduced this iPhone on Apple's keynote on the 4th of October 2011, a day before his death. So yeah, it is actually quite special, this iPhone. The fact that Steve Jobs presented it a day before his passing. Anyways, let me charge this iPhone and we'll walk through the OS. Alright, so I have charged the iPhone 4S. Let's now walk through the OS. Now this iPhone is running the latest that was supported, iOS 9.3.6. This is bare bones. As you can see, we've got the old App Store, settings, calendar, photos, camera. If we take a picture right now, I can take a picture. We've got different filters, good old standard camera app. And then we got App Store, which still works, quite slow, but it works. I can search for apps, slowly getting booted up. What if I search, for example, Google? It gives me all the Google apps. Now, most of these probably aren't supported, but it's the fact that it still finds them is pretty cool. We got weather, location, shows me the weather for Cupertino in California, which is in Fahrenheit. I need to change that there to degrees Celsius. We got even health, which is interesting to see that health was already made its way on iOS 9.3.6. News, Game Center, Wallet, Apple iBooks, which just after I guess was renamed to just Apple Books, FaceTime, calculator, the good old calculator, simple as that. And of course, one of my favorite features, the control center pops up from below. If I unmute the iPhone, and then just that sound, if I bring the iPhone to the microphone and let you hear it, that old Apple sound, turn on and off sound that it made, it's really very nostalgic. Of course, if you swipe below, we got our notification center, settings, all pretty straightforward. General settings hasn't really changed much. It's asking for software update. Apparently it was never installed in 9.3.6. Pretty much, yeah, it's bare bones. And if we go to Safari, web browsing, let's launch a website, for example apple.com. Launches it. Again, takes some time, and the website isn't really optimized, of course, for the older iPhones, but as you can see, it's yeah, a bit of a mess, but managed to launch no problem. Yeah, other than that, it's an iPhone 4S. One of the issues with this iPhone in particular is it's charged 44% now, but that's, if I just let it sit for a bit, it will go down straight to 1%, and then, or just even now, it can just switch off. The battery is obviously heavily degraded. If you replace the battery, which will cost probably around 25-30 pounds, you basically got yourself a small iPhone with a headphone jack that you can use for simple tasks. Now, of course, these, if you buy these used, they're pretty cheap, around 20 pounds, 30, depends on the condition. If you buy these brand new, never unboxed, then you're probably going to have to pay thousands and thousands of pounds. These are obviously becoming collector's items. For the non-unboxed iPhones, as obviously these are rare, they're not produced anymore since the iPhone 4S was discontinued in 2014. But yeah, and of course one thing to check, of course, Siri. Voice control. I forgot how to launch Siri on these older iPhones, I must admit. Oh, there. What's the weather like?
No match found.
What's the weather like?
No music.
Yeah, it is a bit. It was the era when Siri was a bit dodgy, but it's there. We've got the old Apple clock. And I actually like the fact that it shows you on the world clock. Look, it shows the time zone and the actual time difference between my time zone and other cities' time zone. It doesn't do that in modern iOSs. But anyway, this is the iPhone 4S. In my opinion, probably one of the best designed iPhones ever. It was the first iPhone to introduce Siri, and it was Steve Jobs' last iPhone. Let me know, guys, in the comments, what do you think of the iPhone 4S? Do you still have one? Have you ever owned one? Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in the next video.